The morning sun had barely risen when Jasmine Taylor's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. She quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her grandmother sleeping in the next room of their small two-bedroom apartment in downtown Atlanta. The faded wallpaper and worn carpet told stories of better days, but for Jasmine and her grandmother, this was home. At 19 years old, Jasmine's daily routine was a carefully orchestrated dance of responsibilities. She stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, quickly pulling her curly black hair into a neat bun. Dark circles under her eyes revealed the toll of her demanding schedule, but her warm brown eyes still held determination and hope. The kitchen was Jasmine's first stop. She prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and tea for her grandmother, leaving it covered on the table with a handwritten note. "Don't forget your medicine, Grandma. Love you." It had become their morning ritual since Grandma May's arthritis made it difficult for her to cook. Their small apartment was located in one of Atlanta's struggling neighborhoods, where most residents worked multiple jobs to survive. The building's elevator had been broken for months, so Jasmine quietly descended 5 flights of stairs, her worn backpack containing both her college textbooks and her waitress uniform. The early morning air was crisp as Jasmine walked to the bus stop. She checked her watch, a treasured gift from her grandmother on her 18th birthday. The local bus system had become her lifeline, connecting the dots between her various responsibilities. Other regular passengers nodded in recognition. They'd grown familiar with the young woman who never missed her morning route. At Johnson's Diner, Jasmine worked the morning shift from 6:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. The small restaurant was famous for its southern breakfast, and regular customers had grown fond of Jasmine's cheerful service despite her obvious exhaustion. She moved between tables with grace, memorizing orders and offering genuine smiles to everyone who walked through the door. "Here's your usual, Mr. Henderson," she'd say, placing a plate of grits and eggs in front of one of her regular customers, an elderly man who reminded her of her late grandfather. "Extra butter, just how you like it." During slow moments, Jasmine would pull out her nursing textbook, studying between refilling coffee cups. Her dream of becoming a nurse had taken root when she was 15, after watching the kind nurses who had cared for her mother during her final days. Despite the challenges, Jasmine was determined to make that dream a reality. After her morning shift, she would rush to catch the 3 p.m. bus to Atlanta Community College, where she took evening classes. The college's fluorescent-lit hallways and worn desks didn't diminish her enthusiasm for learning. She sat in the front row of every class, absorbing information about human anatomy, medical terminology, and basic patient care. Between classes, she would sometimes call to check on Grandma May. Their bond had grown stronger since her mother's passing 3 years ago. May Taylor had raised Jasmine since she was a baby, working as a housekeeper to provide for her granddaughter. Now, with her health declining, Jasmine was determined to take care of her. At 7:30 p.m., after her classes, Jasmine would head to her second job at Maxwell's convenience store, working until 11 p.m. The store owner, Mr. Maxwell, had hired her 6 months ago, impressed by her work ethic and reliability. The late-night shift was tiring, but the extra income helped cover their mounting bills and her grandmother's medications. The night bus ride home was always the quietest part of her day. Jasmine would rest her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of the gleaming office buildings downtown, wondering about the lives of people who worked there. But she never let herself dwell on what she didn't have. Arriving home close to midnight, Jasmine would quietly check on her grandmother before collapsing into bed. Her small room, decorated with second-hand furniture and a few family photos, was her sanctuary. A worn notebook on her desk contained her carefully calculated budget and future plans. Despite their financial struggles, she managed to save a small amount each month for emergencies. As she drifted off to sleep, Jasmine would often think about her mother's last words. "Keep your heart kind and your dreams big, baby girl." Those words had become her guiding light, pushing her forward through every exhausting day. Tomorrow would bring another day of challenges, but Jasmine Taylor was ready to face them, one step at a time. Little did she know that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine, all because of her kind heart and a chance encounter on her usual bus route. The autumn afternoon in Atlanta started like any other for Jasmine Taylor. After finishing her shift at Johnson's Diner, She hurried to catch her regular 3 p.m. bus to attend her evening nursing classes. The weather had turned unexpectedly chilly, and gray clouds threatened rain as she waited at the busy downtown bus stop. Jasmine checked her watch nervously. Her basic life support exam was scheduled for that evening, and she wanted to arrive early to review her notes one last time. The material wasn't difficult. She had practiced CPR techniques countless times, but the certification was crucial for her nursing program. As she stood among the crowd of waiting passengers, Jasmine noticed an elegant elderly woman walking slowly along the sidewalk. The woman's silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore a classic beige coat that spoke of refined taste. However, something about her movement caught Jasmine's attention. The woman seemed unsteady on her feet. Margaret Wilson, though Jasmine didn't know her name yet, had insisted on walking to her doctor's appointment instead of calling her driver. At 72, she prided herself on maintaining her independence, even against her children's wishes. She had just left her regular checkup at Atlanta Memorial Hospital and was heading to meet her friend for late lunch. Jasmine's observant eyes noticed the woman's face turning pale. Years of caring for her grandmother had taught her to recognize signs of distress in older people. The elderly woman suddenly stopped walking, her hand clutching her chest. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the sidewalk with a soft thud. Without hesitation, Jasmine pushed through the crowd. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She called out, but the woman couldn't respond. Her breathing had become labored, and her eyes showed fear and confusion. Before anyone could react, the woman's knees buckled. Jasmine lunged forward, managing to catch the woman before she hit the ground. Carefully lowering her to the sidewalk, Jasmine's nursing training kicked in. She quickly assessed the situation. The woman was conscious but struggling to breathe, clutching her chest and showing signs of severe distress. "Someone call 911. Jasmine shouted to the growing crowd of onlookers. A businessman in a suit immediately pulled out his phone. Jasmine turned back to the woman, speaking in a clear, calm voice despite her racing heart. "Ma'am, I'm Jasmine. I'm training to be a nurse. I'm going to help you, okay?" The woman managed a weak nod. Jasmine noticed her skin was clammy and her pulse was irregular, classic signs of a possible heart attack that she had studied just the previous week. She loosened the woman's scarf and coat, making it easier for her to breathe. "Help is coming," Jasmine assured her, holding her hand. "Try to take slow, steady breaths with me." She demonstrated deep breathing, encouraging the woman to follow her rhythm. Rain had started to fall lightly, but Jasmine barely noticed, focused entirely on keeping the woman stable. A young mother from the crowd offered her jacket to place under the woman's head. Others formed a protective circle, shielding them from the rain. Jasmine maintained constant communication with the woman, monitoring her vital signs and providing reassurance. 4 minutes that felt like hours passed before the sound of sirens filled the air. The paramedics arrived, their blue uniforms pushing through the crowd. Jasmine quickly briefed them on the situation and the symptoms she had observed. "Good work," one paramedic said, noticing Jasmine's professional demeanor. "Are you a medical student?" "Nursing student," Jasmine replied, helping them transfer the woman onto the stretcher. The woman's hand suddenly gripped Jasmine's arm. "Please," she whispered weakly, "don't leave." Jasmine looked at her watch. Her exam would start in 30 minutes. But looking at the fear in the woman's eyes, she knew what she had to do. "I'll ride with her," she told the paramedics, who nodded in approval. As the ambulance doors closed, Jasmine held the woman's hand, offering quiet comfort. She had missed her bus and would miss her exam, but somehow that didn't seem important anymore. She could retake the exam, but this moment, this chance to help someone in crisis, felt like exactly where she needed to be. The ambulance sped through the rain-slicked streets of Atlanta, its sirens clearing a path through traffic. Inside, Jasmine Taylor, the girl who worked 2 jobs to pursue her nursing dream, was already living that dream, unaware that this act of kindness would change not only her life, but also the life of Margaret Wilson, mother to 3 of Atlanta's most influential business leaders. The emergency room at Atlanta Memorial Hospital burst into action as the ambulance doors swung open. The paramedics rushed in with Margaret on the stretcher, Jasmine jogging alongside them while still holding the elderly woman's hand. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as medical staff swarmed around them. Female, early 70s, Possible myocardial infarction, announced the lead paramedic, found by this young woman who performed initial assessment and maintained her stability. The ER doctor nodded at Jasmine appreciatively as they wheeled Margaret into a treatment bay. Jasmine stepped back, her heart racing as she watched the medical team work. They moved with practiced efficiency, attaching monitors, starting an IV, and administering medication. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, its rhythm irregular but present. Jasmine found herself counting the beats, just as she'd learned in her nursing classes. A nurse approached her, clipboard in hand. "You found her?" she asked. Jasmine nodded, recounting the events at the bus stop. As she described the symptoms she'd observed, the nurse's eyebrows raised, impressed by her detailed observations. "You said you're a nursing student?" The nurse, whose nameplate reads Sarah, asked. "You did everything exactly right. Most people would have panicked, but you kept her stable until we got there." The praise warmed Jasmine, but her attention remained fixed on Margaret, who was now receiving oxygen through a mask. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Doctors ordered tests, nurses drew blood, and Margaret was rushed for an emergency cardiac catheterization. Jasmine remained in the waiting area, unable to leave without knowing if the woman would be okay. She called her grandmother to explain her absence, and then Mr. Maxwell at the convenience store, who, understanding the situation, told her to take the night off. Around 7:30 p.m., Sarah emerged from the treatment area. "She's stabilized," she announced with a smile. The catheterization showed a significant blockage, but they caught it in time. "Thanks to you, she got here before any major damage occurred." Relief flooded through Jasmine. She slumped into a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. Her diner uniform was wrinkled, and her hair had come loose from its neat bun. She realized she was still wearing her name tag from work. "She's asking for you," Sarah added. "Would you like to see her?" Jasmine followed Sarah through the corridors to the cardiac care unit. Margaret lay in bed, looking frail but much better than she had on the sidewalk. The oxygen mask had been replaced with a nasal cannula, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "There's my guardian angel," Margaret said weakly as Jasmine entered. Her voice was soft but clear, with a hint of southern refinement. "I don't even know your name, dear." "It's Jasmine, ma'am." "Jasmine Taylor." She moved closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you." Margaret's eyes were bright despite her ordeal. "The doctor said if you hadn't recognized the symptoms so quickly." She left the sentence unfinished, reaching for Jasmine's hand. Just then, a doctor entered with test results. He explained that Margaret had experienced a significant cardiac event, but thanks to the rapid response, they had been able to insert a stent before any permanent damage occurred. "You'll need to stay with us for a few days," he concluded. "The prognosis is excellent." "Could you stay a while longer?" Margaret asked Jasmine after the doctor left. "I'd like to get to know the young woman who saved my life." Jasmine settled into the chair beside the bed. They talked quietly about their lives. Jasmine's nursing studies, her grandmother, her jobs. Margaret listened with genuine interest, occasionally closing her eyes but always urging Jasmine to continue when she paused. As the evening shift nurses began their rounds, Jasmine realized it was getting late. "I should let you rest," she said, standing reluctantly. "I'll try to come back tomorrow if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Margaret replied. As Jasmine turned to leave, she added, "Thank you, Jasmine, not just for saving my life, but for staying with me. You're a very special young woman." Walking toward the bus stop later that night, Jasmine felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. She had missed her exam and lost a day's wages, but somehow none of that seemed to matter. She had made a difference in someone's life. Isn't that what nursing was all about? What Jasmine didn't know was that in her hospital room, Margaret Wilson was already making phone calls to her 3 children, telling them about the remarkable young woman who had saved their mother's life. The next morning, despite her exhaustion from working the early diner shift, Jasmine made her way back to Atlanta Memorial Hospital. She carried a small bunch of cheerful yellow daisies she'd bought from the corner store. Nothing fancy, but bright enough to bring some life to the sterile hospital room. When she arrived at Margaret's room in the cardiac care unit, she found the elderly woman sitting up in bed, looking markedly better than the previous day. A breakfast tray sat untouched on the side table, and Margaret was gazing out the window at the Atlanta skyline. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson," Jasmine said softly, using the name she'd learned from the nurses. Margaret's face lit up at the sight of her visitor. "Jasmine, dear, you actually came back." Margaret's voice was stronger today, though still tired. She noticed the flowers. "Are those for me? How thoughtful of you." Jasmine found a plastic cup to use as a vase, arranging the daisies carefully. As she worked, she noticed expensive flower arrangements had already started arriving. Roses, orchids, and elaborate bouquets that made her simple daisies look humble in comparison. "These remind me of my garden," Margaret said, touching a daisy petal gently. "Sometimes the simplest things are the most beautiful." Her words made Jasmine feel better about her modest offering. They fell into easy conversation, with Margaret asking about Jasmine's missed exam. "I spoke with my professor this morning," Jasmine explained, settling into the visitor's chair. "She's letting me take it next week instead." She was very understanding when I explained what happened. Margaret frowned slightly. "I feel terrible that you missed such an important test because of me." "Please don't worry about that," Jasmine assured her. "Some things are more important than exams." Throughout the morning, nurses came and went, checking vitals and administering medications. Jasmine observed their procedures with keen interest, mentally noting their techniques. One nurse, noticing her attention, took time to explain what she was doing. "You've got good instincts," the nurse commented. "We could use more nurses like you." Around noon, Jasmine prepared to leave for her shift at the diner. But before she could go, Margaret asked her to reach into the designer handbag sitting on the bedside table. "There's a small notebook in there," Margaret directed. "And a pen." When Jasmine found them, Margaret insisted on taking down her phone number. "I want to stay in touch, dear. You've done so much more than just save my life. You've been a wonderful companion." Jasmine was touched by the gesture, though she felt somewhat out of place writing her number in the expensive leather-bound notebook. She noticed the elegant monogram on its cover, M.W. "I'll try to come back tomorrow after my morning shift," Jasmine promised. "If you're still here, that is." "Oh, they're keeping me for a few more days of observation," Margaret replied. "My children insisted." She said this with a mixture of affection and exasperation that made Jasmine smile, reminded of her own grandmother's stubborn independence. As Jasmine prepared to leave, a delivery person arrived with another elaborate flower arrangement. The card attached was signed "Love, Michael," though this meant nothing to Jasmine at the time. Over the next few days, Jasmine continued her visits, working them around her busy schedule. Sometimes she'd arrive early in the morning before her shift, other times she'd stop by between work and classes. Each visit strengthened their unlikely friendship. Margaret proved to be a wonderful listener, showing genuine interest in Jasmine's studies and aspirations. She shared stories from her own life as well, though she remained modest about her family's status and achievements. During one visit, Jasmine arrived to find Margaret walking slowly around her room, supported by a physical therapist. "Look who's up and about," Jasmine exclaimed cheerfully. "Small steps, dear," Margaret replied with a determined smile. "Just like you with your nursing studies, one day at a time." What struck Jasmine most during these visits was how Margaret treated everyone with equal kindness, from the doctors to the cleaning staff. She learned that this elegant woman had once been a teacher before raising her family, and that love of nurturing others still showed. Neither woman discussed money or status. Their conversations focused on life, dreams, and the simple joy of human connection. Yet all around them, evidence of Margaret's wealth and influence continued to accumulate in the steady stream of expensive gifts, in the private room, in the frequent visits from specialist doctors. But to Jasmine, none of that mattered. She saw only a kind woman recovering from a frightening ordeal, someone who had become a friend. She had no idea that her simple acts of kindness were about to change her life forever. The discovery. On the 5th day of Margaret's hospital stay, Jasmine arrived for her usual morning visit, carrying a paper cup of mint tea. Margaret's favorite, she had learned. As she approached the cardiac unit, she noticed an unusual amount of activity. Men in expensive suits talked in hushed tones with hospital administrators, and security guards stood discreetly in the corridors. When Jasmine reached Margaret's room, she stopped short at the doorway. 3 well-dressed people surrounded Margaret's bed, 2 men and a woman, all appearing to be in their 40s or early 50s. They radiated an air of authority that made Jasmine hesitate to enter. Margaret spotted her first. "Jasmine, "Come in, dear. Please come in," she called out warmly. "These are my children I've been telling you about." The three turned to look at her, and Jasmine suddenly felt very conscious of her waitress uniform and scuffed shoes. She recognized their faces. They were often in the local news and business magazines she'd glimpsed at the convenience store. Michael Wilson, CEO of TechVision Enterprises, stepped forward first. His sharp features softened as he extended his hand. "So you're the young woman who saved our mother's life." His firm handshake was warm and genuine. "Sarah Wilson Chen, Jasmine. I run Meridian Healthcare." The woman introduced herself next. She had her mother's elegant bearing and kind eyes. "The hospital staff has told us how professionally you handled the situation." The third sibling, James Wilson, CEO of Wilson Investment Group, stood quietly observing. "Mother hasn't stopped talking about you," he finally said with a slight smile. "She says you visited every day." Jasmine found her voice. "Mrs. Wilson has been very kind to me," she said simply. "I'm just glad I could help." "Help?" Sarah echoed. "You did more than help. The doctors said if you hadn't recognized the symptoms so quickly and gotten her to the hospital." She paused, emotion catching in her voice. Michael picked up where his sister left off. "We've heard you're studying nursing while working 2 jobs. Mother mentioned you had to miss an important exam to stay with her in the ambulance." Jasmine felt her cheeks warm. "It wasn't a problem. My professor let me reschedule." "Still," James interjected, "not many people would have done that for a stranger." Margaret watched this exchange with bright eyes. "Didn't I tell you she was special?" she said proudly to her children. "And she brings me tea every morning, even though I know she can barely afford her own breakfast." "Mother," Jasmine protested gently, embarrassed by the attention. The siblings exchanged meaningful looks. Sarah pulled up a chair. "Jasmine, please sit. We'd like to talk to you about something." For the next hour, the Wilson siblings asked Jasmine about her life, her studies, her dreams. They listened intently as she described caring for her grandmother, her determination to become a nurse, and her struggle to balance work and education. "Which nursing school would you attend if money wasn't an issue?" Michael asked suddenly. Jasmine blinked, surprised by the question. "Well, Emory University has an excellent nursing program," she answered honestly. "But that's just a dream." "Maybe not," James said quietly. Margaret reached for Jasmine's hand. "My children want to help you, dear. You've given me a second chance at life. Please let us give you a chance to fulfill your dreams." Jasmine looked at each face in turn, realization slowly dawning. These weren't just Margaret's children. They were 3 of Atlanta's most powerful CEOs, leaders of companies worth billions, and they were offering to help her. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," Margaret urged gently. "Let us do this for you." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes as the magnitude of the moment hit her. All her years of struggle, of working double shifts and studying late into the night, of stretching every dollar, and now, because she'd stopped to help a stranger on the street, her life was about to change dramatically. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Welcome to the family, Jasmine." Outside the window, the Atlanta skyline stretched toward the morning sun, its gleaming towers catching the light. But inside room 507 of the cardiac unit, something even more brilliant was taking shape, the beginning of a new chapter in Jasmine Taylor's life, all because she followed her heart and helped a stranger in need. The conference room at Wilson Investment Group's downtown Atlanta office felt worlds away from Jasmine's usual environment. Seated at the polished mahogany table 1 week after meeting the Wilson siblings, she watched as James Wilson's assistant laid out documents before her. "These are life-changing papers, Jasmine," James explained, his usual business demeanor softened by genuine warmth. "We've established a full scholarship fund for your nursing education at Emory University, covering tuition, books, and living expenses." Jasmine's hands trembled as she looked at the paperwork. The numbers seemed unreal, enough to cover not just her education, but to ensure she wouldn't need to work during her studies. Michael Wilson, who sat across the table, noticed her overwhelmed expression. "There's more," he said gently. "We've arranged for your grandmother to have a position as a consultant in our community relations department. Her years of experience in the community will be invaluable to our outreach programs." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. "But Grandma's arthritis." Sarah Wilson Chen, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. We thought of that. The position comes with full medical benefits, including comprehensive treatment for her arthritis. She'll work flexible hours, mainly from home, sharing her wisdom and experience with our team. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. No more double shifts at the diner. No more late nights at the convenience store. No more watching her grandmother struggle with pain because they couldn't afford better treatment. I don't know how to thank you all, Jasmine managed to say. You already have, came a familiar voice from the doorway. Margaret Wilson entered, looking much stronger than she had in the hospital. You thanked us the moment you stopped to help a stranger on that sidewalk. Margaret joined them at the table, patting Jasmine's hand. My children and I have discussed this thoroughly. This isn't charity, dear. It's an investment in someone who has proven her worth through actions, not words. The meeting continued as they explained the details. Jasmine would start at Emory in the upcoming semester. The Wilsons had already spoken with the dean of the nursing school, who was impressed by Jasmine's academic record despite her challenging circumstances. We've arranged for a small apartment near campus for you and your grandmother, Sarah explained. It's in a safe neighborhood, with good access to medical facilities for her. James slid another document across the table. This is a monthly stipend to cover your living expenses. We want you focused on your studies, not worrying about bills. Jasmine read through each paper carefully, just as her grandmother had taught her. The Wilsons respected this, patiently explaining any terms she didn't understand. There were no hidden catches, no complex conditions, just straightforward support for her education and her grandmother's well-being. There is one condition, Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. You must come to Sunday dinner at my house at least twice a month. I've grown quite fond of our talks. Jasmine laughed through her tears. That's one condition I'm happy to accept. After signing the papers, Michael handed her an envelope. Inside was an Emory University student ID card with her name and photo. We had this processed already. The dean is expecting you tomorrow morning for orientation. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city where she'd struggled for so long, Jasmine felt a profound shift in her world. The same Atlanta skyline that had seemed so distant now felt full of possibility. Remember, Sarah said, standing beside her, you earned this. Not just by saving our mother, but by showing who you are every day, working hard, caring for others, never giving up on your dreams. Later that evening, when Jasmine told her grandmother the news, the elderly woman broke down in tears of joy. Your mother would be so proud, she said, holding Jasmine close, so proud. As Jasmine lay in bed that night, in her small apartment that they would soon leave behind, she thought about how life could change in an instant. One moment of kindness, one decision to help another human being, had opened doors she never imagined possible. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter. She would walk into Emory University not just as a student, but as someone who had been given a chance to fulfill her true potential. And she silently promised herself and the Wilsons that she would make the most of every single moment. 2 years had passed since that fateful day on the Atlanta sidewalk. The autumn morning found Jasmine walking confidently through Emory University's medical campus, her nursing scrubs crisp and white, her stethoscope draped professionally around her neck. Her transformation wasn't just in her appearance. It showed in every aspect of her life. The small apartment she shared with her grandmother in the quiet neighborhood near campus had become a warm, comfortable home. Photographs lined the walls, Jasmine in her nursing uniform, her grandmother at her new job, and countless moments with the Wilson family who had become their second family. In the student lounge, Jasmine reviewed patient charts from her clinical rotation at Emory University Hospital. Her grades had consistently placed her at the top of her class, earning her a coveted position in the hospital's intensive care unit training program. There's my star student, called out Dr. Patricia Chen, her clinical supervisor. How's the research paper coming along? Jasmine smiled, pulling up a document on her laptop. Her research focused on improving emergency cardiac care in underserved communities, inspired by her experience with Margaret Wilson. The paper had already caught the attention of several medical journals. Almost finished, Jasmine replied. Mrs. Wilson has been helping me connect with community leaders to implement some of these ideas. Margaret had indeed become much more than just the woman whose life Jasmine had saved. Their Sunday dinners had evolved into a cherished tradition, with Margaret taking on the role of mentor and confidant. She attended all of Jasmine's academic presentations, beaming with pride from the front row. Grandmother May's life had transformed as well. The Wilson Investment Group's Community Relations Department had flourished under her guidance. Working from their comfortable apartment, she had developed programs that genuinely helped local families in need. Her arthritis, now properly treated, caused her far less pain. During lunch break, Jasmine received a text from Sarah Wilson Chen. The CEO of Meridian Healthcare had become a valuable mentor, offering insights into the healthcare system that went far beyond textbook learning. Don't forget about tomorrow's board meeting. They're excited to hear your presentation on community health initiatives. As she walked through the hospital corridors for her afternoon rounds, Jasmine reflected on how different her life was now. Gone were the days of exhausting double shifts and missed meals. Instead, she had the luxury of focusing entirely on her studies and developing her skills as a nurse. But some things hadn't changed. Jasmine still carried the same compassion and work ethic that had driven her to help Margaret that day. She still treated every patient with the same care and attention, whether they were CEOs or cleaning staff. Nurse Taylor called out one of her regular patients, an elderly man recovering from heart surgery. "Could you explain these new medications to me again? You make everything so clear." Jasmine sat down beside his bed, patiently going through each medication. Her ability to connect with patients had become legendary among the hospital staff. Many didn't know her background, but they all recognized her genuine care for others. That evening, as she prepared for her night shift clinical rotation, Jasmine received an unexpected visit from Michael Wilson. He found her in the hospital cafeteria, reviewing her notes. "How's my mother's guardian angel doing?" he asked with a warm smile, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "Still learning something new every day," Jasmine replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "The hospital board can't stop talking about you," Michael said. "They're already hoping you'll consider a leadership position after graduation." Jasmine smiled thoughtfully. "I want to make a difference," she said. "Not just for individual patients, but for the whole community." As they talked, several nurses and doctors stopped by to greet Jasmine, showing the respect she'd earned through her hard work and dedication. Michael observed this with satisfaction, knowing their family's investment in her future had been more than justified. Later that night, as Jasmine made her rounds in the cardiac unit, the same unit where she had spent those days visiting Margaret, she paused by the window where she used to watch the Atlanta skyline. The view was the same, but her perspective had completely changed. She was no longer the struggling young woman who could only dream of becoming a nurse. She had transformed into a confident healthcare professional, earning her success through dedication and hard work, while never forgetting the kindness that had given her this opportunity. And this was just the beginning of her journey. The spring morning dawned bright and clear on Emory University's campus. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as the nursing school's graduation ceremony was about to begin. Among the sea of white uniforms and caps, Jasmine Taylor sat in the front row, her graduation honors cord gleaming gold against her spotless uniform. In the audience, her support system filled an entire row. Grandmother May sat proudly in her wheelchair, dressed in her finest clothes. Next to her sat Margaret Wilson, elegant as ever, flanked by her 3 children. Even Mr. Henderson from the old diner had come, wearing his Sunday best. As class valedictorian, Jasmine approached the podium when her name was called. Looking out at the crowd, she remembered the long journey that had brought her here. Her speech wasn't just about academic achievement. It was about the power of kindness and how one moment could change countless lives. 3 years ago, I was a girl rushing to catch a bus, she began, her voice clear and confident. Today, I stand before you not just as a graduate nurse, but as living proof that compassion can transform lives. She spoke about her new initiative, the Community Healthcare Access Program, CHAP, which she had developed with support from the Wilson family. The program would provide emergency medical training in underserved neighborhoods and create scholarships for aspiring healthcare workers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Starting next month, CHAP will sponsor 10 students from our local community colleges, she announced. They, like me, will have the chance to pursue their dreams of serving others through healthcare. After the ceremony, amid hugs and congratulations, Sarah Wilson Chen approached with news. "The board approved your proposal," she said excitedly. You'll be heading the new community outreach department at Meridian Healthcare. Jasmine's program would combine her nursing duties with implementing CHAP across Atlanta. Her office would be in the same hospital where she had once accompanied Margaret in an ambulance, a detail that made them both smile. Later that evening, the Wilson family hosted a graduation celebration at Margaret's home. The guest list included not just family and friends, but also some of Jasmine's former patients who had become part of her extended family. During the party, Grandmother May pulled out an old photograph. Jasmine in her waitress uniform from Johnson's Diner. Look how far you've come, she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. Michael Wilson raised his glass for a toast. To Jasmine, he said, who showed us that the measure of a person isn't in their circumstances, but in their heart. As the evening wound down, Jasmine found a quiet moment with Margaret in the garden. The older woman took her hand, just as she had that day in the ambulance. You know, Margaret said, when I had that heart attack, I thought it was the worst day of my life. Now I see it was one of the best. It brought you into our lives. Jasmine smiled. I was just doing what was right. And that's exactly why you've succeeded, Margaret replied. You never lost that pure intention to help others, even after all this time. The next morning, Jasmine reported for her first day as a registered nurse and program director. Her office overlooked the very street where she had once helped Margaret. On her desk sat a small vase of yellow daisies, a reminder of her first hospital visit. Her first task was interviewing candidates for the CHAP scholarship program. As she reviewed applications, she recognized stories similar to her own, young people working multiple jobs while pursuing their dreams of helping others. During her lunch break, she visited the cardiac unit where her journey had begun. A young volunteer was helping an elderly patient, showing the same care and attention Jasmine had once shown Margaret. Excuse me, Jasmine called out to the volunteer. Have you ever considered becoming a nurse? The young woman's eyes lit up. It's my dream, but I can't afford the schooling. I work 2 jobs just to help my family. Jasmine smiled, reaching for the CHAP program brochures on her desk. Let me tell you a story, she began, about how one moment of kindness can change everything. And so the circle continued, as Jasmine Taylor helped create new opportunities for others, just as others had once done for her. Her story became an inspiration, proving that compassion, combined with opportunity and hard work, could transform not just one life, but an entire community.